Subject of our Talano today is on integrating climate change consideration in the environmental assessment process. And looking at the number of participants joining in, it's reached the number 44, and we are excited. We are excited, and it demonstrates your commitment in willing to learn and share this important topic amongst us. And this webinar is organized by the Environmental Monitoring Program through the Pacific Network of Environment Assessment, in which Mr. Ivan Diarra is leading. And before I continue, may I acknowledge the contribution and the support of the ACP PNEA Phase 3, who has behind assistance towards all the past webinars and the webinars that are to come in the coming months. The webinar aims to foster meaningful discussions and knowledge sharing on integrating climate change consideration into environmental assessment. By adequately mainstreaming climate change risk and impact assessment in the environment assessment process, we can make informed decisions and protect our communities, ecosystems, and economies from the adverse effects of climate change. And colleagues, we are really honored. We are really honored. And to you, our distinguished speakers, I again, on behalf of the Director General of SPREP, thank you very much for joining us today. And I do believe that all the participants, including the team at SPREP, will learn from you. I encourage you to actively participate in the discussions today. No question is a wrong question. Please raise it so that it might give new direction and new thinking within this topic we are discussing this afternoon. And I thank you once again for your presence, and thank you again to the speakers and to the organizing team of SPREP. And I wish you all the best. Soifua and Vinaka.
Thank you very much, Director, for those insightful remarks and for setting the stage for this important discussion. Colleagues, you heard it from Director Jope right there. This is our discussion, our Talanoa. So we encourage you all to participate, especially member countries joining us today. Would love to hear your experiences as part of this discussion today. So our chat is live. While the presentations are ongoing, please feel free to throw in any questions or any inputs or interventions that you'd like to make. We'll also have opportunities for questions and answers after each presentation, and also during the plenary discussion that we'll be having at the end of both presentations. For now, we'll kindly ask that you keep your mics muted, and if you'd like to jump in, please raise your hand and we'll try to give you the floor. And finally, we'll also be sharing the presentation slides as well as the recording for the webinar today for those who would like to revisit today's discussion. Now, before I introduce our speakers today, I wanted to play a short clip from the World Bank Pacific Climate Resilient Transport Program, which is titled Building Beyond Tomorrow, Adapting to a New Climate Reality in the Pacific. And I think that video really captures the importance of building adaptive capacity in the region, and also embedding climate resilience into how we implement infrastructure across the region. So just we'll take some 3 minutes just to view that clip, and then we'll proceed with our proceedings for today.
Over the past 10 years, we've had a Category 5 cyclone every 2 to 5 years. Then we had the volcanic eruption and tsunami last year.
It is affecting our livelihoods. It is affecting our assets, our homes, and our lands.
It's had devastating impacts on the economy, on people's lives, resulting in loss of life.
We know that climate change seems to be saying to us, we're going to get bigger events, more extreme events more often.
Severe weather events makes transport systems more vulnerable to those events. When those systems go down, people struggle and reliability is compromised.
Development is a big agenda, but climate change continues to undermine that for us. Climate resilient transportation is extremely important, whether it be by land, by sea, by air. Connectivity is critical to development of a country.
It's something that is built for a purpose, and it's always there. And built to the highest standard, it will withhold the very extreme effect of climate change.
What we're trying to do is make it resilient to something which is far greater. As engineers, as scientists, all try and figure out what are we trying to design against.
What we're really seeing that's transformational is that countries are more forward-leaning. They're looking more deeply at the climate science. They're better planning for where to invest in infrastructure that's designed for the long run. Through improved drainage, raising of the road, particularly in really low spots, by putting in coastal protection to protect the road. We're seeing roads less flooded during intense rainfall. The Pacific Climate Resilient Transport Program is incredibly important to ensure that people don't lose access to essential infrastructure and services such as hospitals, schools. People stay better connected to their communities. It will help potentially save lives.
We're not just doing roadworks for the sake of now, but also for the future generations that will come.
We need to move together so that we can reap the economic benefits of development.
My hope is that we will be able to be resilient in our infrastructure, to be able to grow the economy so that people have a better chance of a more successful and happy life.
It's all about building something that will last for generations to come.
Okay, colleagues, I hope that video perhaps adds additional context or grounds sort of the basis for our discussion today. This is a very important topic, and I think it's great to be exploring how we can better implement infrastructure in the face of the existential crisis that is climate change, which is indeed affecting communities across the Pacific. Our colleagues, I'm very excited because we have two distinguished speakers joining us today. Dare I say, close friends as well. First, we have Dr. Bunlong Lang, who is an environmental and social framework specialist accredited by the World Bank. He has over 15 years of experience in assessing jurisdictions of environmental, legislative, and regulatory frameworks and harmonizing local and national EIA assessment approaches with good global practice for investment projects across the Asia Pacific. He has vast experience in PNG, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. His responsibilities include enhancing the cross-sectoral portfolio's environmental and social risk management instruments, including climate resilience and disaster risk management, transport, infrastructure, water, rural and urban development. He's passionate about how projects and policy frameworks in sensitive sectors and vulnerable locations can be designed to reduce adverse impacts and risks through capable and informed management. Now, our second speaker is Christy Harrison. Christy is the group leader for environmental science at Stantec, New Zealand. She has over 15 years of experience, again, across the Asia Pacific region, particularly in environmental management and international development. Christy has particular expertise in the planning, assessment, and management of infrastructure and investments. This includes energy, transport, sanitation, agriculture, and related development projects. Additionally, as the environmental and social safeguards lead for the Tina River hydropower project in the Solomon Islands, Christy is working to see that both national and international standards are upheld across the project. So two very interesting speakers today to enlighten us further. So without further ado, I think I've spoken enough. I would hand it over to our first speaker, Boon Long, who will be taking us through sort of a more theoretical presentation on how to embed climate resilience within the EIA process. And then we have Christy, who will bring that sort of practical experience and sort of best practice for climate resilience in the environmental assessment process. So Boon Long, with that said, I'll hand it over to you to take us through your presentation.
Thank you, Ivan. Can you confirm if you can hear my voice?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for attending this PNEA webinar. And my name is Boon Long. I'm the environmental engineer or environmental safeguard specialist of the World Bank Sydney. I have joined the World Bank Sydney for about 4 years, just before COVID hit. And my presentation is a follow-up to the video clip in terms of following beyond adapting real climate change policies. I know that we have climate change policies in various sectors, including transport, but I am more interested in how to do it at the project level or sub-project level where development investments are really taking place. And the presentation is sharing with a piece of research which is conducted elsewhere, not in Samoa or the Pacific, but this was done 5 or 6 years ago, somewhere else in the Asia. And it first looked at how we can integrate climate change impacts and adaptation measures into the development investment designs and implementation. I think the video clips was talking about the policies, about the transport standards, and looking at the climate change vulnerability. And this presentation probably go beyond that, is about how to use the findings and the results of the environmental assessment process to inform the decision making in terms of integrating climate change impacts and their consequential adaptation measures into the project designs, so that we can ensure that our development practices now are catching up, not only to enhance socially sound, environmentally sound, but also resilience to climate change in the global climate change context. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit from the background to the
sorry, Bruno. Can you share your, we can't see your slides, please. Can you share your screen?
Hold on, I thought I am sharing the screen. Please bear with me with the technology. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, we can see your slides. Yes.
Okay. So now we're moving to the second slide. So the outline of the presentation is to focus from background, rationale, the questions in terms of piece of research on how to mainstream climate change adaptation into the environmental assessment process at the project level, as a follow-up to the video clip about policy level, the analytical framework and the findings based on an ADB funded provincial road improvement project, which is of course in the transport sector, aligning with the video clip for the, that Ivan has shown, and also the conclusion and how to move forward based on my own observations and the feedback from the key informants and the people who have professional experience in climate resilience in environmental impact assessment area. I think we will have another video clip, a short one, to show why in the context of global climate change, sustainable development investments need to be not only environmentally friendly and socially friendly, but also socially sound, but also it must be resilient to the global climate change impacts. Let me see if it works. We can, Ivan, please let me know if it does not work. We can slip the slide. This is an optional.
Okay.
This is Cambodia's rice-growing heartland. The northwestern part of the country produces much of Cambodia's export-quality rice. The region is crucial to Cambodia's agrarian-based economy. But the country experienced devastating floods in 2011. These caused more than $600 million in economic losses and major damage to infrastructure. Powerful storms lashed the region once again in 2013. Rivers overflowed, making recovery efforts even more challenging.
But I think everybody knows and understands that climate change is now a global issue. And it is also an issue for Cambodia. So the patterns are changing, and it does mean that for reconstructing infrastructure that's been affected by the floods, we need to pay more attention now to how to build that infrastructure to be more climate proof to future floods, because they are likely to reoccur.
The ADB is leading the Flood Damage Emergency Reconstruction Project, working alongside the Royal Government of Cambodia. Other key development partners include the Government of Australia. The project has a budget of almost $70 million, and through building and repairing more than 500 kilometers of roads, 6 bridges, and more than 24 irrigation systems. 6 of Cambodia's most severely affected provinces will benefit: Kompong Cham, Kompong Tom, Phra Vang, and Siem Reap, as well as Battambang and Banteay Minche. The project will strengthen community-based disaster risk reduction and coordination in those places. During the worst periods of flooding, the roads became unusable. As a result, the poorest and most vulnerable households were most affected, particularly women and children. Once completed in 2015, the upgraded infrastructure will help reduce poverty by increasing agricultural productivity and improving access to markets, schools, and social services.
So this video clip was put together by the Asian Development Bank in Cambodia and the government of Cambodia, specifically the Ministry of Transport, to raise awareness. And they also have started implementing what we call climate resilient transport sector, transport development. And the focus was one of the ways to focus was to look at how to integrate climate adaptation into the current environmental assessment process. And I would make it short by saying that it's adaptation integrated environmental assessment. And as you have seen from the short video clip, ADB country director was saying that we need to put more efforts or extra efforts for climate resilience and environmental friendly development, which is currently being debated globally, and it has received a lot of attention, not only within the Asian Development Bank, but also among other multilateral development banks. And adaptation integrated environmental assessment can be a meaningful tool for addressing not only environmental concerns, but also climate change impacts, especially in development projects at the project level. That's what he was trying to see. So based on that video clip and the focus, I was interested how did they do it at the investment project level. So the literature has says that while adaptation integrated environmental assessment is a way to go forward, because two reasons. One is that EIA or environmental assessment policies are already introduced in many countries, including developing countries. And we already have environmental assessment guidelines and procedure in place in many countries, not to talk about multilateral development banks such as Asian Development Bank. But there are some limitations of the existing environmental assessment process in how to identify climate change impacts on the project. But it is part of the EIA, but the EIA professionals should also learn how to identify climate change impacts, or it is another separate expertise. And if we want to add climate change adaptations into the current EIA process, we may need to review and approve the legal instruments, and also making sure that the institutional capacities are put in place, including resources and skills. This is another challenge in moving forward with the adaptation integrated environmental assessment. And in reality, the literature shows that there are some unclear procedures for including adaptation in the development operation policies. Even though we are promoting adaptation integrated environmental assessment, often we also see that there are other pathways. The disaster risk management experts have integrated climate change impacts and adaptation measures into their disaster risk management policies and project design. The engineers have also done some work on this. So there are some various pathways that can be done beyond the adaptation integrated environmental assessments according to the literature. And as you may recognize from the 2 video clips, we have seen that building climate resilience transports, especially road, is a topic of increasing concern everywhere because people need to access to roads both in dry and raining seasons. During flooding periods, they need to access to health facility. They need to access to schools for studies. They need to access agriculture. They need to go for market. So this leads to a question that I am talking about: how development partners or donors such as Asian Development Bank have recognized that effort to overcome poverty and sustainable development can no longer ignore the urgent needs to address climate change impacts and the adaptation measures in the project design. Because if we go with the business as usual or development as usual, the investments can even face more increased vulnerability to climate change risks and impacts, either sooner or later. But we have seen that there's increased climate change events that create more vulnerability to the investments. And we need to collect more evidence of how we can do adaptation integrated environmental assessment for investment projects, especially in countries and locations that are vulnerable to global climate change. So I put together four questions, but I'm going to focus on the aim. The aim was to see why environmental assessment was already part of the investment project cycle, how in reality climate change adaptation and environmental assessments can be mainstreamed into the investment project. And the 4 questions are formulated to seek further insights into how the implementers, in this case, the Ministry of Transport, and involved actors, including the stakeholders, the funders, and key government agencies, can be jointly responsible or can contribute to integrated climate change adaptation in the project's environmental assessment process. Because it involves, like Ivan said from the beginning, theoretical understanding, I was asked to also engage with a theoretical framework, which is, in this case, is the analytical framework based on years of experience of Ostrom, who is the lead author in America in introducing institutional change into development by introducing new rules, new norms. In this case, the new rules and new norms that we're talking about is to integrate climate change adaptation measures into the environmental assessment process. And she was her theoretical framework was looking into 5 features. One is on the left-hand side, looking at the contextual factors, the reality, the baseline, where are we now? What are the attributes and conditions of the project location of the resilient investment, resilient road sectors that we wanted to invest in. Second is talking about what are the central rule in use. Is it just environmental assessment safeguard, or are we also talking about mainstreaming climate change impacts as the funding conditionality introduced by Asian Development Bank and other co-funders? and also look at how we use the pathway or the entry points to make the investment projects not only environmental friendly, but also climate resilience, and what are the real outcomes based on the institutional change and the performance that has been done through this ADB funded project case study. So based on that, I would like to invite you to look at the two top lines. One is the relationship between multilateral development banks, that is the ADB, and the government partners or the implementing agency, the Ministry of Transport. We know that environmental assessment has been introduced into the project cycle for a long time, even since 1980s, but climate change adaptation is newly emerged and has been debated and introduced, I think, after 2010s. And what are the drivers of institutional change based on Ostrom's framework? And do we really receive climate resilient development practice while maintaining environmentally sound and socially sound development practice at the same time? Or we just focus on climate resilient practice, we forget about the impacts on the environment and the livelihood and the society, which is part of the environmentally and socially sound development. So because it's the Asian Development Bank funded project, and the co-funder is the World Bank, ADB, administered pilot program for climate resilience, which was a new initiative introduced in the 2010s to ensure that climate risk and adaptation measures are introduced mainly at the policies, the sectoral policies level. I think it focuses less on the adaptation measure at the project level, but they wanted to give open arena for the implementing agencies and Asian Development Bank to look into whether they wanted to use environmental assessment as a pathway to mainstream climate change risk and adaptation measures, which is the focus of this research. And so based on that conceptual understanding, I looked at a Cambodian provincial road improvement project, which, as you may see on the title of the slide, it's from 2011 to 2023, which is more than 10 years, because there's a hiccup a little bit when we introduce climate resilience into the normal project development process, because they needed to step back and think of how to mainstream climate resilience into the investment project cycle. And they need to do it because of the pilot program for climate resilience funding conditionalities. And it is also because ADB safeguard policy statement require that they need to do environmental assessments. So they need to meet these two conditions in order to move forward at least. So in this picture, the gentleman was showing that because of global climate change, he could observe that the current road tide can no longer cope with rain intensities and flash flood. He was saying that during raining season, the water can be up to his knee level standing on the current existing road. And therefore, we should not do business as usual. Something must be done. And even local villagers like him have some ideas. You need to either raise the road surface, you need to enlarge the box culverts so that the water or the flood can flow faster. And he said, but I don't know, you guys are the experts in the Ministry of Transport. That's what he was saying at the end. So I was very interested in the road infrastructure because it is actually a top priority need for the Cambodian government, and perhaps it is a most invested sectors that Asian Development Bank and other development partners have provided to developing countries such as Cambodia. And road infrastructure has also gained a lot of attention in terms of observing and seeing how resilient climate resilience and adaptation have been introduced, and what are the key lessons learned that we can further take from to improve more in the road and transport sectors, as said in the two video clips. So Ostrom was saying that whatever you do when you introduce change into the normal investment policies or development projects, you need to first look at the contextual factors of what you're doing. So in here, we look at it and noted that the location is in flood-prone area. Normally, the first thing to do is to avoid the location, but this is probably not possible because the road was there. They need to rehabilitate and expand the road surface. Second is that one way to do it is to change the design from earth road to or gravel road to SBST, which is the kind of single bituminous surface treatment or even concrete surface road, so that it is more resilient to climate change and flash floods. And Ostrom also asked the players, implementers, to look at the central use of the rule. In this case, we noted that the PPCO and also Asian Development Bank wanted to improve climate resilience in order to obtain sufficient resources and skill to inform development options that are not only environmental friendly, but also climate resilience to cope with the global climate change impacts. And there's an ability to learn through this project life cycle and develop skills. Those who engage in the project, including the staff of the Ministry of Transport, to assess climate change impacts and adaptation strategies as part of the engineering design, as part of the environmental assessment process. And there are some clearly distinguished roles and responsibility and resources. Resources is not a problem because the PPCO here is willing to top up the incremental cost and provide it on top of required skills and studies that are needed in order to meet the rule-induced indicators. So I will not talk more about the methodologies, how I did the research. I'll jump into the findings based on the research aim and the 4 research questions that I put previously. So I noted that while the PPCO and ADB wanted to push adaptation, integrated climate change adaptation, I noted that the environmental assessment process or even the policies do not yet include the requirements for addressing climate change impacts and adaptation strategies, although there are some discussion or focus on the greenhouse gases emissions counted in the current environmental assessment policy. But again, I like to focus that this study was done 5 years ago, and ADB was implementing the safeguard policy, the SPS, safeguard policy statement. Probably now with the new environmental and social framework, they have climate change standards. I think EIAs 9, the conclusion can be different. Anyway, the use of environmental assessment process as condition to shield against damage to community and the environment was there, but probably it is not yet included in the policies. And I am glad to see that Asian Development Bank has taken the lesson learned. It's not in the policy, so now they wanted to introduce it in their new environmental and social framework. I think it's EIAs 9 or 8. So through the PPCO, which was jointly administered by the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, we wanted to focus that the road investments must which are vulnerable to climate change must commit to address climate change impacts and include adaptation measures through the environmental process, through the engineering designs, and other necessary I think other necessary pathway if possible, but mainly focus on climate adaptation integrated environmental assessment. But from my point of view, I think these are talking about things that are driven by donors, that are so much driven by donors, consultants. We rely so much on the consultants who are engaged by these donor-funded projects. If we don't have the consultants who have the skills, there are more challenges, and it can prolong the project implementation, which probably happened to this case study. It has taken more than 10 years to complete a provincial road rehabilitation project. So it's good to integrate climate change adaptation measures into the project's environmental assessment process as part of the decision making. And this is a chart of saying that, look, this is a traditional environmental assessment process. Here's how you can include adaptation as part of your traditional process. It may take a little bit more time, efforts, and extra skills of the EIA experts, but things can be done under these case studies. And there are certain things that can be done more. For example, instead of add-on adaptation into the traditional assessment process, it should be included from the beginning, even during the screening of the project site, the selection of the project site, and also the EIA screening at the early stage. Don't wait until the IEE or EIA is conducted. So Ostrom said that there are always some challenges which the implementers need to be aware of and need to prepare in order to address them. Under the adaptation integrated environmental assessment process, there are at least 3 challenges: institutional challenges, technical challenges, and of course, financial challenges. No money, it will be difficult to implement the change introduced into the project implementation cycle. Institutional challenge is that this is the first time that Asian Development Bank and the Cambodian Ministry of Transport introduced adaptation integrated environmental assessment process. There are some institutional capacity, the EIA consultants, the Department of Environmental and Social staff do not yet have the skills and capacity to do so. And they need to rely on external consultants. And also there's a lack of institutional blueprint in how to do it. Sometimes they wanted to move faster and they wanted to forget about climate adaptation integrated environmental assessment process, but they cannot do so because it's the funding conditionality. And when we look at the consultants who drive the seeds of adaptation integrated environmental assessment process, they said, I wanted to be a capacity of the government counterparts, but I don't have the government counterparts to work with me on the climate change adaptation. Probably it is not yet their mandate for the environmental and social department staff. And so things take longer time, and it's a challenge that we need to look into for future project investments. Technical challenge is that we are now learning by doing in terms of collecting knowledge, raising awareness, and using adaptation integrated environmental process to inform the project design and implementations. And we need to ensure that engineers who are normally say that if I do not see the facts and they are lacking of evidence, I don't want to change my engineering design. It is probably the same for environmental specialists. We wanted to have more knowledge, more awareness, and some good evidence, so that we wanted to push for the adaptation integrated environmental assessment process, even though we know that this is a way to move forward, but we still need more knowledge, more evidence in order to convince the clients and ourselves to move forward. Oh, that's what I said here, that engineers do not like to change or modify the engineering design unless they have the evidence. It's the same with other specialists. The study noted that if we wanted to include adaptation strategies into the project's environmental assessment process, it costs about 30% more, or the incremental cost is about 30%. So if it is a 1 million provincial road, it's gonna cost, I think, 1.3 million to do climate resilience investments. So which is a challenge. In this case, it is fine because the PPCO is willing to do the top up, but if without the PPCO top up, the government has to seek funding sources from elsewhere, or the government needs to commit that they need to cut down the quantity or the length of the roads in order to make the road resilient to climate change, but the length will be less because of the funding capacity. And I noted that in the current trajectory, the current trend is that we don't want to look at a separate extra cost. We wanted to see it as part of the engineering design, as part of the policy, as part of the environmental assessment. So it can be embedded there while, and the cost will be much less, and we don't need to worry about that because at the end of the day, we still need to address climate change impacts. So it's happening, it's real. So in conclusion, I would say that integrated climate change adaptation into environmental assessment process is not just simply a results that we are looking into quickly. It is an ongoing process. It can take extra time, extra efforts until we have more tangible evidence to enable the development practices, not only promoting environmental friendly, but also promoting climate resilience in the project design and implementation. And this is the way to move forward in the futures, that adaptation integrated EA process should be done early during the project identification if possible. In the case of ADB, I think it waited until the detailed design and implementation because the PPC all come in after the project appraisal. That's why it causes some delay, some debates about how to do things. So based on the lessons learned, I think we can take it and we can move faster and we can collect more evidence in order to ensure what we're talking about, mainstreaming climate change impacts and adaptation strategies through the environmental assessment process in a meaningful and also time meaningful and also on time. Let me stop here, Ivan, over to you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Lang, for that very effective presentation. It's a lot of detail that you've covered there. And I really like the analytical framework that you presented. I think it really puts everything into picture. And another point that I found really interesting was the cost that you sort of identified, a 30% extra cost to embed climate resilience in projects. I think that's a very important consideration to be made. Now, is this sort of costing based on a specific project, or was this sort of a general assessment or finding that you made?
Hi, Ivan. 30% is the average cost in the literature putting together by climate change economists and transport economists and environmental economists. It's not my finding. My guess is that because this is an add-on climate adaptation requirement during the project implementation, the cost could be even a bit higher than 30%. And Asian Development Bank and the Cambodian Ministry of Transport was trying to find a way to cut costs and also to make it as a good example so that they can replicate the model for other provincial roads in the country. And for ADB, it's a very good lessons learned for them to introduce to other countries. But I believe that it's been 5 or 6 years from that experience. So there are more knowledge, more evidence, more ways to move faster, and the cost probably is less than 30% now. From what I heard in the literature is about 20% now. But again, it is case by case. It depends on the location, the capacities of the implementing agency, also the consultants that have been mobilized by the project to do the work. Over to you.
Thank you, Bulong. Thank you for that clarification. Now, colleagues, please drop any comments or questions in the chat. But I do note that we have another presenter, Christy. So please, go ahead and use the chat function and let's keep discussing. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Dr. Lang, for that informative presentation. I'd like to pivot to our second presenter, Ms. Christy Harrison. And like I mentioned, she's going to focus more on sort of the practical aspects of really integrating climate change resilience in the assessment process. So with that said, Christy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Just checking you can see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you to SPRAP for hosting today's event and for Ivan, Jope and others for their organisation and hosting today. And thank you also to my co-presenter, Bun Long. That was a very interesting presentation. So as Ivan has said, the topic of my talk is the practical applications. So how to integrate climate change into your impact assessments and provide some real world examples. A little bit about me. So I'm the group leader in environmental science from Stantec. I'm also the deputy chair of the Environment Institute of Australia and New Zealand Impact Assessment Special Interest Section, as well as on a member of the Pacific Network for Environmental Assessment. And I need to update my blurb, I think, Ivan. Either that or I'm getting old because I've got 20 years of experience now, including over 10 years working in the Pacific, as well as around the world. So what are some of the issues that we're facing? Well, according to the Pacific Island Forum, climate change is the single greatest threat facing the Pacific today. And that is because it comes with a massive economic, social and environmental burden. The impacts of these extreme events and other associated impacts of climate change cost countries money because you keep on having to repair your infrastructure. People have to rebuild their houses. People have to replant their crops, from just very small impacts through to sort of nationwide sort of infrastructure rebuilds and things. It is felt by everyone in the community. The Pacific, it has a unique geography which places them at particular risk of climate change. A lot of countries are very low-lying and or their populations are concentrated in and around the coast, where some of these impacts, including flooding and sea level rise, are seen most directly. Combined with that, the community can often be more vulnerable to climate shocks in terms of there tends to be sort of lower socioeconomic groups, so that when an incident does happen, there's often less resilience in terms of being able to cope with these events. Combined with that, their communities are often very isolated. I mean, a lot of countries and regions throughout the Pacific can take hours, days to travel by boat, even when the sea is friendly, let alone when it's stormy. And in that case, infrastructure can sometimes, and transport can be cut off for days, weeks, even months. Combined with that, communities are often very dependent on primary industries and subsistence agriculture and fishing, which are often some of the sectors most impacted. So in terms of what can we do? Well, according to the International Association for Impact Assessment has much to contribute in assisting with governments meeting international commitments to address human-induced climate change and assisting industry and the public understand the environmental and social consequences. So for people on the call, whether they're consultants that are preparing impact assessments, regulatory agencies reviewing these, or financiers that are trying to grapple with some of these issues, engineers that are trying to design to adapt. Basically, the earlier you start to look at some of these issues, the more likely you're going to be able to address them, and that's where impact assessment can be particularly helpful. So some definitions. So we kind of bandy around climate change, sort of there's various definitions, but basically it's a change over time that persists for an extended period. Whether or not that's human-induced or not, we won't go into that, but that's the formal definition from the IPCC. But in a nutshell, climate change is basically a hazard that needs to be managed. And impact assessment is the ability to identify and address these risks and impacts being caused by climate change. So at the end of the day, environmental and social impact assessment, it's about risk assessment and management, and climate change is just one of these issues that we need to include as part of the assessment. So what are climate hazards? Well, there's almost an endless list of things that can be caused by climate change, ranging from the really obvious floods, storms, drought, wildfire, through to some impacts that are often less obvious, but can be as, if not more, have as much, if not more, adverse effects, such as increasing stresses leading to, soil degradation, crop losses, spread of pests and diseases, and that's on top of existing pressures on people and the environment through, development and those kinds of things. So on top of that, the physical and financial toll of hazards and associated events can be significant and are often not borne equally. As I mentioned before, more vulnerable and isolated communities are going to feel these things much more heavily. Therefore, the planning and assessment of projects is a key opportunity to identify and mitigate these risks. So, managing climate hazards is basically another form of risk management. So, like any hazard, you need to identify it. What is the vulnerabilities inherent in your project? Then identify the potential impacts and look at solutions for how to address this. And in the worst case, you need to plan and then respond to events when they occur. That also raises questions such as, what are acceptable levels of risk? Like Bun Long has just said, it can be really expensive if you designed, every bridge to withstand a 1 in 500 year event. And what costs should be borne by people in the environment? So in terms of, both natural and built infrastructure have a varying ability to withstand these events. And in an engineering design sense, often we include an increased resilience for structures that can have bigger impacts. So, for example, you've got dams are often designed for a 1 in 1 million year event, but stormwater systems are 1 in 10 or less. Your natural systems vary greatly depending on location, but can increase the resilience of your human-built systems. But effectively, there's not one sort of solution for every situation. It's context specific based on those levels of risk to people and the environment. For example, you're going to impact a lot more people if the dam on the left bursts than if the ford on the right-hand side overtops. And it's about thinking about those things in advance and applying that in your situation. When you're assessing projects, you not only need to look at the impacts of the project on the climate, but also the impacts of the climate on the project. And I'll just take you through some examples of that. So first of all, looking at the impacts of project on the climate, that's traditionally looking at your greenhouse gas emissions. So most obvious ones are things like your diesel generation. What are the carbon dioxide emissions, equivalent emissions that you're going to be producing over the life of the project for a road? What is the number of vehicles and therefore the emissions coming from that road? Those are known as Scope 1 emissions. You should also look at Scope 2 emissions, which accounts for things like electricity and other resources that your project can be dependent on. For example, if it's a factory, it's not only the energy for your heating, but yeah, it's your electricity, heating, cooling for the operation of the project and where that's sourced from. And looking at ways such as alternative technologies and efficiencies to reduce those emissions. There's also what's known as Scope 3 emissions, sometimes also known as whole-of-life emissions, which includes the materials and construction processes. So when you combine all of those aspects, you get a true sense of your carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So on the left, we've got sort of a diagram showing not only is it the materials and the construction processes, It's also your operational, your electricity and the emissions from the project itself, and any kind of demobilisation as well. Addressing and looking at those whole of life emissions can help to sway decision makers to adopt more sustainable solutions in some cases. How do you calculate your the emissions of a project? There are actually a range of calculators for how you can do that, some of which are freely available online, and I've just included one from the US EPA. It guides you through a series of questions where you can actually calculate the emissions from your projects through that. So have a look online and you may be able to find something that's applicable in your situation. I'm now going to talk about some situations which may be particularly applicable in the Pacific, and situations which we're coming across on a fairly regular basis. So I'll just run through this quickly because I've realised we're a bit short of time. So first of all, coastal development. What are the issues and risks that we have to deal with? Well, like I said before, coastal land is some of the most vulnerable to climate change impacts. It's often highly populated, but can also contain some very sensitive ecosystems, such as your coral reefs, your mangrove systems. Things to consider, you need to look at sea level rise over the life of the project. And when I say life of the project, that goes back to my earlier slide. Are you building a road that's going to last for, that's going to be there for 100 years or more? Are you building a resort that's going to house, 1,000 people and probably has a design life of 25 plus years, or something smaller scale? Plan for coastal erosion, whether that's hard or soft engineering solutions, elevating houses and important infrastructure above inundation zones, and in certain circumstances, considering coastal setbacks. And that is actually the retreat option, where you take your critical infrastructure, your hospitals, things like that, away from the coast, so that if these events occur, they're not affected. Nature-based solutions are often talked about, and this is a diagram that shows sort of the nature-based on the left and the hard engineering solutions on the right, and there's often a continuum in between. And often you can actually combine these approaches. For example, in the lower part of your coastal zone, where you've got regular wave action, that's where you may need your harder solutions, but at the higher elevations, that's where you can potentially incorporate your nature based solutions, your plantings, or if you're in a more sheltered area, nature-based solutions will do just fine. Transport networks. So these are things like roads, bridges, ports. They are often lifelines of communities. They're often also very expensive long life assets. So what are some solutions here? Well, like I said before, moving things away from the coast can save you money in the long run. Look at site-specific data in terms of your rainfall, your flooding. Bunlong suggested talk to your locals. They will often know the height of the regular flood zone, even if your data on rainfall is incomplete. There's also the need to balance the design with need. For example, not every bridge needs to be massively high above the river. That will be very, very expensive, and like was earlier said, maybe 25 to 30% more costly than a lower solution. But if you design for that solution to be inundated, that can actually be a much more resilient solution than a really expensive bridge. For example, a crossing that's designed to overtop, or a bridge that's designed to be washed out every now and again, but can easily be put back into place, maybe with the addition of a swing bridge, so that even in those extreme events, people still have access. It's about what is the most cost-effective solution, and looking outside your project. In the energy supply space, often a lot of communities are dependent on diesel for generation. They, of course, directly contribute to climate change. Renewables can not only help with the energy transition, but can also reduce reliance for countries and communities on costly imported fuel. There's no one fit all solution, but what is best in this situation? Solar is particularly useful in the Pacific, where you have long sunshine hours, as long as you have storage or some other backup for times when the sun's not shining. Wind can sometimes be less suitable where you have frequent cyclones. Hydropower can provide storage, but has its own set of impacts. And then you also have to think of transmission. So above or below ground power lines, there's also options of tidal energy and subsea cables and things like that. From water supplies and dams, I mentioned those briefly. So dams can be not only for hydropower, but also for drinking supplies, for irrigation, as well as flood mitigation, and sometimes all of the above combined. Groundwater extraction can in itself actually cause saltwater ingress into aquifers, particularly if it's located near the coast and or on small atolls. You need to account for extremes in rainfall. So what is the storage going to be in your worst case scenario? What is your backup option if there's a major drought, or if something breaks, can the community maintain it? A good one is to protect your surface and groundwater sources. So, you have to consider things like your sanitation, long drops and disposal of wastewater to ground can directly affect your groundwater supplies. Maintaining your forested upper catchments can improve the water quality in your surface water catchments. You also need to think about, in an extreme event, what's worst case scenario if a dam breaks? Who's going to be impacted downstream? What's the vulnerability? Bury penstocks if you can, to prevent them being broken during a storm. So, in summary, all activities are influenced by the climate, but some projects have greater impact than others. An impact assessment is a key step in the climate change transition, because the earlier risks and impacts are considered, the more likely they can be addressed. However, impact assessment in and of itself is not sufficient. It needs to be complemented by appropriate design, as well as adequate monitoring and enforcement during implementation. However, even small actions, when combined, can have major benefits. And at the end of the day, climate change, if you look at it, it's just looking at ways to find innovative solutions to problems. And a lot of it can be helped by that local level, empowering communities, training, capacity building, planning for events, and designing for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Maybe a round of virtual applause for Christy. Do I have my applause there? But thank you so much, Christy, for that insightful and grounded presentation. Really very useful, I think, examples that you presented there, and very relevant as well to the Pacific region. So thank you so much for that.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Colleagues, like we mentioned earlier, this is our discussion. We've heard from Boon Long and Christy. We now open the floor to everyone. I know there's a lot of you who are burning to share your experience, perhaps ask some questions. Please, the floor is open. Would love to hear from you.
Ivan, I noted there's a few questions in the chat. Is it worth going through some of those that people have asked through the course of the presentation as a starting point?
Thank you, Christy. I think there were a couple of comments here that were made after Boon Long's presentation. So maybe we'll start going through the questions in the chat. And the first one here is from Sophie EIA. She says, thanks for the great presentation. Community is well aware about the impacts of climate change as they are facing these impacts, and the results from ESIA will or shall also inform the engineering design. In your case, and I think this is referring to Boon Long's presentation, the awareness is for who? Engineers or government counterparts? And why the engineers resist to avoid or mitigate the impact through the design? Over to you, Boon Long.
Thanks, Ivan, and thanks, Sophie, for raising this, the questions for clarifications. First, because of the global climate change, we know that we need scientific data to support the traditional knowledge of what Sophie said here is that communities awareness. So community awareness is not probably always reliable with the global climate change. That's what the literature said. That's not what I said, but I believe what the literature says, that you need to sometimes talk with the experts in climate change and also use scientific data, like Christy mentioned, to back up the traditional knowledge and awareness. It is the engineers, the civil engineers, who say that I can't change my engineering designs unless you give me tangible evidence and clear information of what are the changes that are needed in my engineering design. Otherwise, it's not possible for me to change because I need to answer the questions to my team leader. I need to answer to the Ministry of Transports, and you cannot just change the technical designs without clear evidence and empirical evidence and also scientific data back up. But of course, like Christy said, traditional knowledge is one of the pathways to identify potential climate change impacts. For example, community will tell us that the height of flash flood is at this height up to my knee. Last 2 years. So you need to consider something in your impact assessment in your engineering designs. Counterparts here, I think we refer to the employees or the environmental and social staff of the Ministry of Transport, who are appointed to work closely with the climate change consultants, the environmental assessment consultants, so that they can inform what the Ministry of Transport's environmental and social assessment policies are, what they are doing, and also for them to learn from the from the consultants and the engineering firm. What they found out is that it was very difficult to find these government counterparts for two reasons. One is that they are already very busy with their day-to-day administrative works. They have their own tasks to do. Second is that climate change impacts are probably not yet in the environmental and social department's responsibilities. So they know that it's important, but I need to first prioritize my day-to-day administrative task. So these are the findings from the piece of research. Over to you, Ivan.
Thank you, Long, and thank you, Sophie, for that very good question. Moving on, we also have a comment here from Tekura from the Cook Islands. She had to jump off to another meeting, but she made a very good comment here. Interesting point that stood out on the slide. It's climate, not environment, which encapsulates the complexity of integrating climate change in EIAs. Very good comment, Tekura. Okay, I see another comment here from our colleague Vani. Vani says data is also an important component. And I very much agree, especially with talking about climate change. We're dealing with projections, we're dealing with a lot of calculations. And so data, or good data, is certainly very essential to be able to make those informed projections. And of course, the decisions that are based on those projections. We also have another comment here from Director Hayden from Niue. Hello, Director. He says, thank you for the presentations. Interesting and informative. SPREP, I think we need a workshop to digest all the current and emerging issues. We very much agree, Director, and I think Bunlong and Christy perhaps are also in agreement. Moving on, I think we have another question here for Christy from Nathan Beer. He says, great presentation. I have a question about sea level rise forecast data in the Pacific. We often look to high emissions scenarios like the RCP 8.5 or SSP5 to 8.5. Forgive me, I'm not very familiar with these terms. But outside of the IPCC, there is still contention about the risks associated to Arctic ice sheet melt. How does government, who is naturally risk adverse, navigate this contentious issue to data? I think the question here is about data. Christy, I'm not sure if you have a grasp on that question.
Yep. Thanks, Nathan. It's a really good point. And Ivan, as Ivan was just saying, all of these are models. They're predictions. They have assumptions and uncertainty. But the IPCC is the best knowledge that we have to rely on to date. What I would suggest is, rather than worrying too much about the model itself, actually look at the project and the issue that you're dealing with. And like I was saying before, what is the design life of this project that you're looking at? Because the shorter the timeline, the more in line those projections generally are. So that can potentially help and try to reduce sort of over design. That would probably be my main suggestion. I don't think it's necessarily for countries to go and do their own models. I mean, you can, but basically look at the project you have and look at what you're trying to mitigate and go from there. On the sort of negative side, trends that we are seeing at the moment is looking towards the worst case scenarios of climate change predictions. I try to stay positive, but yeah, hopefully that's helped at least answer the question in part.
Thank you, Christy. Nathan, Beer, I hope that answers your question. And also, colleagues, please feel free to jump online. The floor is open. If you want to perhaps share any questions or comments to us, please feel free to unmute your mics and join the discussion. We're going further down the chart. There's more comments coming in. We have one from Joyce Sewell from Chuk in FSM, and this is to Christy. It will be great if you can educate us here in the FSM. SPREP, this is where you come in. Thank you, Joyce, indeed. And perhaps this is why we're hosting this webinar as a platform to share this discussion. And the PNEA is another platform to sort of jump in and connect with Christy and other sort of practitioners in this space. Okay. Director Hayden makes another very good comment. Very interesting for planning and policy. With climate change, long-term may need to discuss the EIA process and procedures. Maybe loss and damage, adaptation. Donors may need to relook at monitoring and evaluation long-term. Indeed, Director.
I might just add to that, Ivan, that's an interesting comment. Thank you. So when I was saying the earlier you can be involved, the better, but actually the more strategic you are with your planning of your infrastructure, the planning of where people are going to live, where people are building their houses, the more strategic you can be, the better, rather than once you've got a proposed project. I mean, often that's what we come across, but if you can take it that level above, and that's where the government comes in, and look broader term around where should we and should we not be allowing things to occur, that can often be of greater benefit. Also, sometimes it's about taking blinkers off. I don't want to say engineers per se, but sometimes, it can be, oh, we need to repair this bridge. Well, is that actually the best solution, or do we need to look at other things which may or may not be, more effective and or cheaper? Thanks. Van Long?
Hi, Ivan. I just wanted to say two things. First, climate change adaptation integrated in environmental assessment process has been introduced and implemented in advanced countries such as the Netherlands and Canada. So if we are very interested how they mainstream climate change impacts and adaptation strategy in EIA process, we can look at examples or practices in these two advanced countries. But the second point is that in developing countries such as Vietnam and Cambodia have also introduced climate change impacts, climate change mitigations, and adaptation measures in their updated ESIA, in the updated environmental and social impact assessment guidelines. I have reviewed a couple of ESIAs in Vietnam, and there's a subsection talking about climate change impacts and adaptation measures as part of the national requirements. In Cambodia, we have recently updated the environmental code, which has a very comprehensive section on ESIA policies, and it also requires the assessment of climate change impacts, mitigation, and adaptation measures. How to do it in Cambodia, it is still a question to be seen, and I'm very interested in terms of the tangible guidelines, how to do it at the project level, because they now have it in the environmental code, in the environmental policies, but they still need to further break down into the guidelines on how to do adaptation or climate change impact assessment in the EIA, in the environmental assessment process. Over to you, Ivan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bornong. And I think perhaps in the Pacific here as well, this might be something that's very important, having guidelines for how to, adequately sort of embed climate resilience in the EIA process. I think that will be really useful to practitioners and policymakers in the region as well. Colleagues?
Hi,
Yeah,
Ivan. I'd
go
just
ahead.
like to say that climate change impact and adaptation strategies have been included in the updated EA policies in Cambodia. It was influenced partly by the PPCR, the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, which I show in my case study. And the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience has been implemented in Samoa. I think you are based in Samoa, right? So talking about updating environmental assessment policies and guidelines to include climate change impacts and adaptation strategy can be perhaps further taken in Samoa or countries in the Pacific that have piloted the pilot program for climate resilience. That's my hope. I'm crossing fingers. Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that point as well, Long. I think my colleagues and I will recall, I think earlier this year, there was a World Bank TA, which we were consulted and involved in, which was focused on incorporating climate change in Samoa's codes of environmental practice. So the TA was focusing on how to incorporate climate change. So it's focused on doing a gap analysis and then some recommendations for how to sort of adequately do that. So you make a good point there, and that slipped off my mind. But indeed, this is something that can be replicated across the region as well. So thank you very much for that. Christy, I think there's another question for you from Nyalangis Posanao from PNG. She said, sorry, I just thought of this question. Coming from the fishing industry in PNG, how do we measure carbon emissions from fishing vessels? Apology if this is not related to today's topic, but if you have any idea surrounding this question, thank you. Christy.
Thanks. So interestingly, fish are one of the lowest forms of carbon produced for animal protein. 1 kilo of fish results in around about 1 to 5 kilos of CO2 equivalent emissions versus 10 or 100 times that for red meat. It's not as low as plant proteins, but it's on par with the likes of poultry. So fish and farm poultry are some of the lowest carbon emissions. And a lot of that has to do with you're measuring like your diesel generation and the embodied carbon of a ship. But except for activities like bottom trawling, where you're actually disturbing the sediment and potentially releasing carbon that way, it's actually a really efficient and climate-friendly way of producing protein. So, and there are studies out there that have calculated emissions. Yeah, can definitely help there if need be.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Elangis, for that question. I think I see not many questions in the chat anymore. There's just one here from Joyce. Again, she says, Chuk is going to have water and road projects, and this kind of information is very useful for our Chuk Environmental Protection Agency to be a master with. I agree, Joyce, some capacity building is definitely required. I think this is why this discussion is also happening today. Colleagues, please, if you have any burning questions while we have the experts, Christy and Bonlong, here with us, feel free to throw it in the chat. But not forgetting my colleagues here with us, I know they also have some contributions to make. So perhaps I'll turn to Puta and Vi. Any question, thoughts, comments, contributions to the discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Ivan. Just to reflect on the few pointed information that was shared during the presentation, and especially from Mulong, it is good to note that some of the Pacific Islands development partners are starting to consider the integration of climate change consideration in their policy, environment policy and framework. So notably the Asian Development Bank. So it is good to note on that. And also I tend to agree with Mulong, the finding that you presented, that climate change consideration is not that there is a gap in terms of climate change consideration in the EIA process. And evidently, if you look at EIA reports, you can see that, of course, there are discussions around climate informations, weather informations, and so forth. But there is no clear on how these climate information and weather information will be considered in project designs, locations. So that's an indicative that this need to be more to do on the area of the climate change consideration in EIA, and that can be evidently seen in current EIA reports. So based on that, we really encourage member countries to consider this area in terms of strengthening the EIA process, in terms of the consideration of climate change in the international EIA processes. There are guidelines and toolkits available that online that can be starting points to guide member countries in this important area. So that will be from my wish to share. And thank you again, Ivan, and to our presenters and the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Ratu. Very good point. Ratu?
Yes, thank you, ID. Again, I would like to thank Dr. Len and also Christy for the excellent presentations. I think just reflecting on some of the other excellent points that were raised, I think Dr. Len, you also raised, that development as usual or business as usual is may lead to further vulnerability of countries to climate change. And also the need for more evidence of how this could be rolled out, climate integrated, especially in vulnerable countries. Also very interested in the findings of your study. I think Puta already touched on the policy issue, and of course you also mentioned that the situation may have changed since it was about 5 years ago that this was conducted. And I also note the challenges, the institutional, technical, and financial challenges that you raised in integrating climate into the EIA process, noting the example of the engineers, and of course the need for adequate information and understanding of the needed changes and the implications or risks arising from those changes, as well as the extra cost of climate resilient, roading infrastructure. So that was very, very good. And also not your conclusions. For Christy, thank you very much for your presentation. I think it was very, very informative as well. Thank you again for expounding on the, the climate change issue. And of course, it is the major impact and threat to the Pacific in this century. And also note, your outline of how we could look at coastal development and transport networks as examples, the issues and risks, as well as the potential solutions. And there you touched also on nature-based solutions, which are another quite an important issue for the region. And some of the takeaway messages that you mentioned about, the benefits of identifying the risks at an early point, as well as, even the smallest actions can have the greatest impact. So I think that could resonate with our practitioners online as well. And also the issue of community empowerment in this. And I also note again, Dr. Leng, you mentioned that some of the other more developed countries, such as Canada and the Netherlands, are already practicing EIA, climate integrated EIA. And if the practitioners who are joining us today are interested in learning more, it'd be great if you do have any context that could be useful for them if there's interest in pursuing further information on this area. In this area. And I think my colleague Ivan also mentioned that possibly we could look at regional guidelines in this area of climate integrated EIAs, and you both made some very, very interesting and constructive points towards such an initiative. So thank you very much for that. That's all from me, but I also want to thank all of our colleagues and practitioners online for the excellent reflections, comments, and also the clarifications that you requested from our presenters today. So that's about it from me, but I'll turn it back over to Ivan for any last words. Thank you.
Thank you, Ratu. Since we've been chatting, I think there's been a couple of more burning questions in the chat. I do know we're a little out of time, but I think some of these questions are very interesting. So maybe we'll just go boom, boom, boom and see if we can tackle some of these. So I'll hand these to Boon Long and Christy. The question is from Patricia Parkinson. Integrating climate change impacts in EIAs is likely to become increasingly necessary to prevent climate change litigation. Any comments on this?
Can I jump in, Ivan? Two things.
Yes, please.
One is that we need to do both. We need to do climate change mitigations, which is the preventive approach, and we need to also enhance the practice of climate change adaptations. These two things need to go hand in hand because we already passed the stage of predicting climate change impacts. We are already feeling the real impacts of climate change to our environment, our society, our infrastructure, and all kinds of investments that we have put so far. Second thing is that I think my presentation here, I advocate for the integrating climate change impacts and adaptation strategy into the environmental impact assessment process and procedures. That's what I am advocating, and I wanted to see more buying in, especially in Pacific Island countries, like I mentioned, perhaps in Samoa or other Pacific countries where the pilot program for climate resilience have put some piloted investments in there. And that's the way to move on based on the lessons learned, like we experienced in Cambodia. Over.
Thank you, Boon Long. Christy, any comments on that?
Well, there It's a very interesting issue and something I haven't really thought about, but it is, I mean, there's examples of class actions that have been brought against governments for exactly this. I think we're possibly a little way away, but maybe not. But yes, if governments don't act, there is definitely grounds for litigation. It's a really difficult one. But if we need to have strategies and plans in place to deal with this. Otherwise, we're burdening future generations.
Yes. Very good point indeed. Chris, thanks for that question. Patricia, certainly something that would likely become very important as we move forward. The next question is from Kamil. Besides the resilience mitigations required to underpin infrastructure going forward in Pacific Island nations, there will need to be a real commitment on the part of first world countries to realistically fund these developments if the region is to avoid large people migrations, like is happening in other parts of the world. Sadly, this is not something that EIA processes tackle. Thank you for that question, Carmel. I think this is talking about the impacts of climate change around relocations and resettlements of people outside their jurisdictions, which is indeed an issue that is, like Bunlong mentioned, I think is beyond, in many cases, remediation or sort of addressing. So very good comment there. I don't think that's a question, so we'll move forward, except if any of you have a comment to that, a response?
My main response is that it's definitely recognised, and the likes of World Bank, ADB, EBRD, and those international financiers are increasingly investing in this space. Maybe not directly in relation to the migration issue, but there's increasing investment in this space, which will definitely help.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Christy.
Hi, Ivan. Just to continue that, changes have happened, or changes have been happening, and it happens slowly. It happens slowly. When I started looking at the PPCR practice in 2012, we already have heard about higher policy level to convince the government leaders, even the prime ministers, that you need to tackle climate change, you need to promote resilient mitigations into your national development policies. And I think your clip was talking about promoting resilient measures into the transport sectors at the policy level, and then it can cascade down to the investment level. So these are some things that have been done, but I know that we want it to get done quicker, but we are moving with the slow machine. That's what I quoted from my previous learning. We are moving there, but slowly. And yes, it is not something that can be addressed by the EIA process itself. It needs both the policy commitments, the sector's commitment. That's why we have a transport sector, and we also have climate change development report, CCDR. These are some things that provided tangible findings and recommendations to inform the national development policies to tackle climate resilience measures into the policies and also cascade down into the investment project and sub-project level. So I think we are moving forward, and I see the institutional change, and institutional change always faces challenges, and the challenges can take time to tackle. Like Christy mentioned, there are issues and solutions, and we need to learn from the solutions that we have implemented, and we are moving slowly because we are the big machines over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Burlong. Very good point. And perhaps the last question today is from Jonathan Chang. I think from experience, what are some recurring obstacles or implementation gaps that you have encountered across the Pacific? And what are some improvements or changes you would like to see to address these obstacles? I think we've touched on some of these. It's, policy and sort of, the practical aspects of, implementing climate resilience EIAs. But again, I pass it on to you, maybe Christy.
Thanks. So every country, whether they're in the Pacific or not, has an infrastructure deficit. And there's actually a related presentation that I've given previously on facilitating sustainable investment in this area. Basically, there's always a gap between the money that you need and the money that you have to invest in this space. And that's why being strategic and having things like your country infrastructure plans, your urban development plans can really help invest your money wisely. Like Bunlon said, climate resilient infrastructure can cost more. Is it better to build 3 roads that are climate resilient, or 4 because you've got your 25% additional to give an alternative route away? And these are the kind of things you need to think about. It's getting away from that blinkered single project focus. Thanks. Really good question.
Yes, indeed. And very good response there, Christy. Burlong, just checking, do you also have any additional points to make there very quickly?
I could not agree more with Christy's elaborations. Very meaningful. One point that I like to add is that we all need to keep pushing. We all need to keep pushing that the impact assessments consider climate change aspects. It may not be there because other priorities like 3 bridges or 4 bridges, but we need to keep pushing. And it may not be there because just the normal environmental assessment process itself takes time, and it sometimes hinder the infrastructure investment because there's turnaround saying it because of you guys asking for impact assessment or EIA assessment. It hinders the infrastructure investment, but we need to make a balance. Either we want to move faster, or we want to have more quantities of road lengths, or we want to move slower. And we do consider the quality of our infrastructure investments. We do consider that the quality of investments take into account not only the traditional mindset of environmentally and socially sound, but also climate resilience and whatever green, clean development that we're talking about. Of course, it takes extra effort, so we need to keep pushing. And I would say that I have seen the light that we are moving there. It's a bit slow, but if we keep pushing, it will be moving faster. Over.
Thank you so much, Burlong. And that's, I think, the word or the sentence to end our session today. We can see the light and we're moving towards the light. So thank you very much. And maybe a round of applause for everyone here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, especially our speakers, Burlong and Christy. This was a really insightful discussion. It was so good that, in fact, we went far ahead of our initial estimated time for our webinar. But it was really a pleasure to have you along for this discussion today. So thank you so much for making the time. Now, colleagues, one last request for me while we're all online. I would like to kindly request if you can all just put up your faces on your screens. Just put up your cameras. Let's take a group photo, just to sort of capture and commemorate this discussion. So please, would love to see all your beautiful faces. Join us. Let's take a quick, I guess, screenshot before we let you all depart.
I'm
Come on,
not
everyone,
sure
no
if you
chat.
noticed, but at one point there was 62 people on the call, so that's a good number.
Yes.
Everyone's being shy though.
Yes, indeed. We cannot turn. Oh, wait, let me check our settings here. I hope. Oh, allow camera. I have to do this individually.
Oh. 26.
For 26 people. No worries. We're going to do that. Let me allow the cameras for everyone. Just bear with me. Yeah. Don't leave us just yet. Okay. All right. Jonathan, camera. A few more. Camera. Patrick. Okay, I think you should all be able to. I can see a few. Okay, there you are.
I have to check.
Okay, let's do this. One more. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. We know we took a lot of your time this afternoon, but we hope you enjoyed the discussions. But until next time, we hope you stay in touch, and we'll be sharing copies of the presentation as well as the recording. So we look forward to having you next time. And until then, thank you very much and bye-bye.
All the best. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Christy. Bye, Bunong.
Thank you, Dr. Bunong. Thank you, Christy.
Yes. Cynthia, Carietti, Kumki.
Thank you, practitioners.
Blaze Anderson. Thank you, my brother. Joyce. Thank you very much, Joyce. Sally, Agnes, Jonathan Chang, Taumari Baram. Mauri, and thank you.